7. Although it was due to several tragedies, Dante quickly gained absolute power over the empire over the past 3 years. Power gained so quickly is usually precarious. However, since there were only 7 traitors, it was a testament to how well Dante and his advisor Casimir had done so far. Yuria marked the corresponding number of people on the layout of her subjects that she had drawn in advance and handed it to Dante. 3 grade 10 subjects, 3 grade 7 and 1 grade 5? Jean also checked the location of the traitors out of the corner of his eye. They are too trivial to recruit to assassinate the regent of the empire. At first glance, I noticed that they were all people who didn't even know Jin's face. They were not from a powerful family, nor were they possessed of special abilities. They are just ordinary subjects. Dante also had the same question. He couldn't immediately think of what they could do to assassinate him. However, the apparent status and abilities can change at any time. Zephyrin was like that, and there was no telling what form the Prophet's chaos control power could change people into. Yes, I believe everyone is too busy to think about betrayal. At those words, many of his subjects cursed in their minds, asking what the hell this was, but those who lied were not included. Silence followed. Even when Yuria was checking the liars, the hall was quiet for nearly 10 minutes, so the subjects had no idea why Dante was acting like this. Dante, who had been pondering for a while, eventually turned his head and looked at Jean as if he couldn't do anything. He beckoned me to come closer and put my ear to him. Why? I knew those 7 could be traitors, but what should I ask next? Why did you become stupid while I wasn't seeing you? Now that's a question. I'm naturally somewhat dull. I should have planned the list of questions properly in advance. There is no need to worry, Dante. Ask if there was anyone who passed on information to Runkendal. That makes it clear whether they just had a different mind or betrayed us. Oh, I understand. Dante cleared his throat. I don't have many questions left, so you will have to understand my bizarre behavior. No. No. Yuria thought about listing the liars but stopped because there were too many. Has anyone here given information about Nana Empire to the Garden of Swords? Of course the answer was no. However, the 7 who were initially caught by the power of truth were telling lies again. Jean was soon able to understand why the Garden of Swords had recruited such ordinary people as its agents. People entering the Imperial Castle. This means that only those who entered the Imperial Castle were needed unless the Prophet granted them special abilities. The reason why someone needed to enter the Imperial Castle was obvious. Internal structure. The Beemont Imperial Castle was the largest external building in the world and had the most complex internal structure. In particular, spaces that were not open to the public, such as the Emperor's residence or underground passages, were largely unknown to other major powers. The 7 people confirmed to be traitors are also made up of low-level and mid-level people, so they don't know all of those areas. It is natural that these are things that forces like Runkendal and Zippel Unknown were unable to find out, even though they had planted numerous spies in the Imperial family for a long time. In addition, the secret areas of the Imperial family changed their locations irregularly. So why them? Jean made an assumption. In the past, a tunnel made by a prophet in the Soda Desert. What if you need the help of someone from the Imperial family to make it? Even if it's not very detailed information about the secret area, the rough structure of the castle's interior may be needed. Even assuming that doubts remained. Dante has often gone on solo missions to contaminated areas, so if he were to be assassinated, such a moment would be more appropriate. You can gradually find out why I chose the Imperial Castle instead of performing a solo mission. First, all I had to do was check what information they had passed on and whether my guess was correct. Jean. Finally, ask if anyone has been implanted with chaos or other special abilities. Dante nods. Last question. Among the subjects gathered here, is there anyone who has been given chaos or other special abilities? Doesn't exist. This time no one told a lie. This meant that the traitors also did not receive the power of chaos. In that case, even if we catch them right away, there is no way there will be any other casualties. Arrest the relevant person. When Jean whispered, Dante widened his eyes and revealed his suppressed anger. Hylon. Command Matriarch. Kima writes Julian writes Edmund Keld va Roskala Bernard Chen Kilane Nash Ataboyne. Capture these 7 immediately. Highlands elites who attended the meeting captured them before even 15 seconds had passed. The subjects were shocked by what had happened out of nowhere. The intention to suddenly convene and intimidate such small children only seemed to create a kind of fear in the eyes of the subjects. Or I even thought that Dante had finally expressed his revenge on Ron and turned into a tyrant. My Highness, why are you doing this? Your Majesty, why us? Other subjects may misunderstand, so I will tell them the truth. This person who is currently standing behind me is the Princess of the Free State of Tychon and the indentured servant of Az Mill. Ah! Exclamations came from everywhere. If the disguised girl was Yuria Alprian, the identity of the man who was whispering to the regent was as obvious as fire. Now there was no reason to hide my identity. I am Jean Runkendal of the Bamel Alliance. According to our Alliance intelligence sources, the imperial family betrayed Zippel and joined the Garden of Swords. So there was a need to urgently find out if there was anyone in the Empire who had a connection with the Garden of Swords. The captured traitors knelt before Dante. Dante immediately blindfolded Yuria, then drew his sword and struck the neck of one of them. The thick blood poured out, instantly staining the golden floor with blood. Hee. Oh, it's a misunderstanding. I betrayed my ship. Close your mouth. Those who died painlessly before were just lucky. You are unlucky. The traitors trembled and looked around. Not only Dante and Jean but even the subjects who were harboring anger and hatred at the extreme overwork under the regent were glaring at them, as if they were going to kill them. Even if they did not like Dante, it was true that all of the subjects gathered here were dedicating their lives for the Empire. Everyone felt great pride that the imperial capital had maintained such a healthy condition during this era of chaos, and they also thought that there was no better way for the Empire than Dante's way. But those traitors tried to ruin it all. If you want to get rid of even a little bit of bad luck, it would be better to answer the questions I ask with the very detailed truth from now on. Dante winked, and the servants quickly took care of the body and wiped away the blood. When Yuria opened her eyes again and saw that there were only 6 people left, she thought that Dante was surprisingly powerful. First of all, what did you promise from the Garden of Swords? Jean expected eternal life, just like foolish people like Barton and the elders of the Segar family did in the past. Survival. One of the traitors locked eyes with Dante. He had the calmest eyes among the remaining 6. He was determined that this day might come someday. Living. Your Highness the Regent, we have met Lord Rosa in person. To be exact, it was an encounter through a crystal ball, but through talking with him I was able to see the power of Runkendal. He said he would destroy the entire world except Hupister. So you betrayed me so that you could abandon the ruined empire and go under Rosa and live a miserable life? If you truly care about the Empire, you must surrender to Lord Rosa right now. You may call me a traitor, but this is the last honest word I can give you. According to Yuria, the traitors, including him, truly thought that way. Even if not only the Empire but also the entire world joins forces, Rosa will not be able to be helped. I will not blame you for your weak choices, so you too calmly accept the punishment that will be handed down in the future. You must be thinking of exterminating our entire family. Everything that exists in your family will be erased from the world. However, if you confess the information you provided to Rosa, I will spare the children and innocent servants. Yuria showed off a blue string, revealing that Dante's words were true. The traitor who was talking to Dante bowed his head. There is only so much information that low-ranking subjects like us can know, Your Majesty. I swear that the information I provided to Lord Rosa is only about the structure of the castle's interior. At that point, Jean once again thought of the Prophet's Tunnel. Did you ever explain what you were going to do with that information? Yes. It was true. As Jean expected, they had no information to report to Runkendal other than the approximate structure of the Imperial Castle. In fact, Rosa didn't even ask them for any other information. I will keep my promise. Take it with you. Yes, let's go. Seeing the traitors being dragged away, every single one of the subjects had an evil look on their faces. The evil was not directed at Dante but toward Rosa and the Garden of Swords. Jean stepped forward. The prophet in the Garden of Swords has the ability to create special tunnels. It is highly likely that the reason the traitors received the structure of the castle's interior was to create it. Maybe they were not only trying to assassinate the regent, but they were also trying to invade the imperial castle through an underground tunnel. Therefore, the task from now on was to check whether a tunnel had already been formed inside the imperial castle. Dante had already thought of a method. We will destroy the entire imperial castle and find it. It's full of symbols of the disappeared imperial family anyway, so there's nothing to regret. We will start immediately, so get ready. As soon as Dante's command was given, the subjects' faces turned pale. They had never seen Dante not keep what he once said. Your Highness the West Regent, you're going to destroy the imperial castle? Are you talking about that right now? Those who were careful not to keep their mouths shut due to the pressure of their power raised their voices as if they were arguing. Exactly. Do you have any objections? This is a castle with thousands of years of imperial history. It's not right to say we're going to get rid of it so easily. Your Majesty the Regent, although many of the main members of the Beaumont family have betrayed the empire, this imperial castle belongs to the empire, not the imperial family. It belongs to the empire. Dante's eyes narrowed. I was thinking that, even if it wasn't for this incident, I would have to downsize the imperial castle someday. How many people and how much tax money goes into maintaining this needlessly grandiose golden castle? Your Highness the Regent, I know very well that your Majesty trusts Sir Jean. But isn't it just a matter of opinion to decide such an important matter? It's too late once the symptoms are confirmed. If an army of chaos instead of an assassin emerges from an unidentified tunnel, how will you handle it? But... Stop. I have no intention of reversing my decision, so my subjects should accept it. For the safety of the empire, this castle will be destroyed 10 or 100 times. The servants eventually closed their mouths at the shrill voice. If I said one more word, I would definitely be in trouble. Jean was still proud of Dante's regal aspect and thought that this choice was absolutely right. However, I felt like the picture would get even better if I stepped forward. All of the subjects may not know Dante, but their loyalty to the empire is deep. However, I am dissatisfied with the overwork and pressure. Jean cleared his throat. Can the Bamul coalition formally express an opinion on the demolition of the imperial castle? Please speak, Sir Jean. As Lord McGill said just now, the prophet's tunnel is just a rumor. Also, as the regent said, it is an issue that cannot be undone once it is confirmed, and it seems that the regent will never let go. Can you please stop His Highness the Regent? How can I stop something that not even the subjects of the empire can do? Instead, the Bamul Alliance, which was the first to talk about tunnels, also wants to take responsibility for the demolition of the castle. As allies, the subjects exchanged glances and murmured. Jean smiled at them. It was a smile filled with pure goodwill, but the subjects were also worried about what the 12 horsemen were planning to take. Currently, the Free State of Tychon has the world's highest level of defense capability. In addition to the improved dragon spear, a magical cannon looted from the previous imperial family, it is armed with various cutting-edge technologies. Are you saying you will share those technologies with us? Exactly. I will share more than before. The Bamul Alliance will dispatch Sir Amala, the person who contributed most to the increase in Tychon's defense capabilities, and other personnel, and provide some of the key materials needed for development. From the moment the imperial castle is demolished and the new castle that will become the center of the empire is built regardless of the existence of an underground tunnel. The subjects thought that now that Jean had shown his card, the next thing he would say would be about what he would gain from the empire. In addition, we will provide support not only for the defense of the new castle, but also for the entire empire, and technology for flying ships will also be shared. I think this will be sufficient compensation for destroying the symbols of the old world. However, when there was talk of additional support again, the subjects wondered why Jean was doing this. The Bamul Alliance and the Empire are allies. The Regent and I are closest friends, and the world is on the verge of destruction in the face of chaos. I hope everyone knows that this support is not intended to take something away from the Empire in the future. Even if he didn't destroy the Imperial Castle anyway, Jean had planned to do so from the beginning. Now that Rosa has become an evil spirit, and someday after I defeat her. The crisis between the Empire and Dante was no different from the crisis between the Bamel Alliance and Jean. Even if you finish off Rosa, Zippel and Kinselo remain. Thanks to you for showing your displeasure, you are receiving an unexpected gift from Lord Jean. The benefits that Lord Jean has decided to provide are incomparable to something like this Imperial Castle. Even though Dante already knew about this issue, he was condescending for no reason. The subjects were confused as to whether they should like this or hate it, but after a few days their minds became firm on the former. Amala came to the Empire and showed various equipment in person. Naturally, the various artifacts developed by Qual far exceeded the common sense of his subjects. The demolition is not happening as quickly as expected. I'm concerned that I'm taking up too much of your time. It involves destroying the largest structure that exists on Earth. It wasn't a problem that would end in a day or two. Jean and Dante were walking around the demolition site looking for a tunnel. Chamberlain-level personnel and ministers who knew all the secrets of the castle combined each other's information to predict the location of the tunnel, and whenever a new location was discovered, Jean personally checked the location. This was because Jean was the only one who could properly detect soul energy. Are you okay? Most of the urgent matters have been resolved, so your safety is the most important issue now. And this is fast enough. No matter what, you can't just hit it and destroy it. Thank you for saying that. By the way, the person who is presumed to have given the assassin to the Imperial family is Joshua Runkendal. If that's really the case, then that guy really is like a cockroach. Even though he was stripped of his jockey qualifications and became a wreck, he came back. Even if it's not as strong as Runtia, he's probably gotten stronger. I don't think that will be much of a problem, but I'm worried about whose sword he gave to the Imperial family. It was difficult to guess the assassin given to Aaron Viment in Runkendal. Of all the people I've encountered in the Garden of Swords so far, there won't be many who can defeat the current Dante. Rosa herself, Padler, Runkendal, Lionel, and Runtia. However, Runtia is currently unable to come out with royalties, and Padler and Lionel's destructive sword skills were not at all suitable for assassination. Of course, there are other people who can defeat Dante, and if their goal is not assassination but a surprise invasion through a tunnel, they alone will cause devastating damage to the Empire. And LT. Runkendal orders Viment's royal family, Aaron Viment, to kill Dante Hiron, the Lord of the Sword Emperor, and gives away the monster. And GT. Give away the monster. Jean kept thinking about that part. Runkendal was left blank due to lack of record magic achievements or other reasons, but the ambiguous expression monster was clearly specified. Is it simply because the object's inaction is so great that it is expressed as a monster, or is it a strange being created by chaos or something else? I couldn't figure it out until I encountered it. Above all, the reason why Jean continued to consider the possibility of assassination rather than invasion was because the expression monster is singular. Wouldn't it be highly likely that he is the former head of Runkendal or the teenage knight you met? I guess so. As the demolition of the Imperial Castle began, an ominous feeling, as if something had struck Jean, was disturbing his mind. I don't know why I feel so dirty. Nothing has been clearly revealed yet. Perhaps it was because he felt angry just thinking about the Garden of Swords being engulfed in chaos, but Jean tried to suppress the sticky, ominous feeling that was clinging to him. Kududuk. The sound of buildings being demolished was heard everywhere. Several days have already passed, and only the intact buildings have been torn down with no results, so if it weren't for the people's absolute support for Dante and Jean, the atmosphere in the capital would have become much more chaotic. Jean, Dante, and the main axes of the Empire were hoping that the tunnel would not be discovered. However, exactly 10 days had passed since the demolition began. Jean proved that his prediction was correct. Hongida Dante. You found it? It's in the third throne room on the first floor. Let's put the troops on standby and go right away. As soon as the third throne room began to be demolished, the hidden spirit was revealed. No one else felt it. Upon inspection of the scene, there seemed to be nothing unusual about the third throne room which was being demolished. Srung Dash. When Jean pulled out Bradamante, Dante and the waiting troops took a defensive stance. Soon the blade stained with spiritual energy cut straight through the floor of the third throne room, and everyone who saw it could not help but swallow their breath. What the hell is that? There really is a tunnel under the Imperial Castle. What was revealed when the floor split open was not a stratum or a cross-section of the underground and a pile of stones but a black well-like mound. The entrance to a tunnel large enough to fit about 100 people at once was revealed. How could we not know anything while something like this was forming underground in the Imperial Castle? When the Prophet formed a tunnel in the Soda Desert, Jeep did not notice it at all. I was hoping it wasn't there, but it ended up coming out. Jean looked around at Dante and the troops. There are likely to be more entrances. Now that the existence of the tunnel has become clear, speed up the demolition and evacuate the people near the castle as planned. It would be best if you and I go inside and check it out. Dante nods. The two went straight into the tunnel and the rest performed their duties. The tunnel was so deep that it was surprising that the ground did not collapse, but unlike tunnels Jean had experienced in the past, it did not have a very complicated structure. Even as he reached the end of the basement, Jean was overcome with an unpleasant and ominous feeling. It wasn't like I was afraid of an unknown enemy, but for some reason I started to break into a cold sweat and my heart rate accelerated. Are you okay? It finally showed. Right after I started researching, I felt strangely dirty. I don't know why this is happening. It's nothing to worry about. The moment I said that, suddenly a chill went down my spine. I didn't feel any special energy, but I felt like if I moved wrong now, I would get a deep cut somewhere in my body. I felt confident. Dante also felt the same sense of crisis about half a beat later than Jean. And there is only one person in the world who can make two people nervous like this without any sign. A person called Assassin among assassins. No way. Wickedness dash. A sword passed by both people at the same time. Dante was slightly cut on the back and Jean narrowly avoided it. And the moment Jean made eye contact with the person who attacked and counterattacked, he was able to recognize the identity of the ominous premonition that had been tormenting him. Asleep. Yona, sister. Jean couldn't help but grit his teeth as he watched her rush at him again. Yona Runkendal. As soon as I saw that image and those heartless eyes filled with chaos and murderous intent, I almost lost my senses. However, showing weakness even for a moment in front of someone like her was nothing short of suicidal. What the damn bastards did to you? The love and care he had for his only youngest sister was much deeper and greater than the hatred he had for Rosa and the Garden of Swords that rose up in an instant. That was the reason why Jean was able to capture the opposite sex in that split second. It was not a defensive instinct to protect himself, but the only thing that made Jean move was to protect his sister. So that when my sister comes to her senses, she won't be overwhelmed with guilt and hurt for hurting herself. Kong dash. Bradamante fell to the bell as fast as light and deflected Jonah's sword. Jonah looked embarrassed for a moment, as if he didn't know he would take this so easily, and there was no way Dante would miss that opportunity. Jean! However, Dante did not delve into the moment when Jonah hesitated. I knew better than anyone what she meant to Jean, so I couldn't hurt her carelessly. I missed the opportunity to end the situation as soon as it started, so I didn't know what would happen if I couldn't quickly subdue Yona. While Yona was buying time, an invasion could begin through another tunnel, or Yona could escape from the two men and indiscriminately slaughter the people in the capital. For example, Dante thought of his friends' hearts before the safety of the empire. It was a choice he should never have made as the supreme ruler of the empire, but Dante had no choice. Thank you, Dante. What should I do next? I'm embarrassed to ask you this question too often. Jean quickly regained his composure. I felt more intense anger than ever before, but at the same time my mind and inner self became stronger than ever. If you make even the slightest mistake from now on, you will have to lose Jonah. She is in a state of runaway marriage, and the Prophet must have played some more tricks on her. Maybe that's why he was softer than the Jonah that Jean knew. Although it was more destructive, Jonah's characteristic shadow-like movements had clearly faded. Is suppression possible? After 2 more battles, a conclusion was reached. Dante, if you and I get a little hurt, I think we can subdue you. If it is murder rather than suppression, it is possible without taking such damage. From Dante's perspective, killing Jonah was of course the right thing to do, and Jean was asking an unreasonable request. Good. However, Dante didn't even worry about it. If it had been Ron who was in the tunnel, he would have also asked Jean for the same request. I owe you a lot. That's nonsense. I have a long way to go to repay you for what I have received so far. Whoa. Jean overlaid his spirit on Bradamante. However, even though the strong spiritual energy was aimed at him blazing like fire, Yona did not show any reaction. Is it because there is no reason? If you are a sister, you should have a strong rejection reaction to spiritual energy. Jonah was casually pointing his sword at Bradamante, who was covered in spiritual energy. The sword was also not Jonah's sword, Death. At first glance it looked like Death, but it was a bit longer, and above all it didn't have that unique eerie feeling. Sigh! Dante, who stepped to the side, let out a sigh. A bit of Dante's hair was cut off by Jonah's blade. She decided to eliminate Dante first. You have to be prepared for quite serious injuries. It looks like there hasn't been much fighting outside yet. There is no particular disturbance at all. Can you feel that from here? Thanks to experiencing a little bit of the sense of commitment. I must hope that this tunnel was created solely to infiltrate Yona. Dante was so focused on keeping Jonah in check that he couldn't pay attention to anything else. Even if it wasn't like that in the first place, reading the atmosphere outside from this deep tunnel was an overwhelming task for him. You have become a monster as expected. Maybe that's why these ordeals keep happening. As Jean began to check in earnest, Jonah had to change his plan to deal with Dante first. It is a joint effort between the magic swordsman, the closest to the world's strongest and the best sword of the Empire. The two even worked well together like twins, so all Yona could do was attack randomly, almost to the point of struggling. However, the problem was that each attack was fatal. Even if she has become dull, the spirit of death is the spirit of death, and the darkness of the tunnel made her more free. When you thought you were in front, a sword came from behind, and when you thought you had swatted away, a stab came again from a blind spot. Even though Jean and Dante were fighting with their backs to each other, creating a square and digging in was something that only Jonah could do. Die, Jean. Runkendal. That person didn't look like Jonah at all. Although that fact continued to scratch his insides, Jean did not lose his resolute attitude. I remember the first time I visited the unknown. Even back then my sister almost killed me and this friend. Kill everything. You can't kill me today like you did then. I will definitely make it like that for you. The moment when Jean and Dante can end Jonah together has come quite a few times. However, the opportunity to subdue them did not come soon, and the two people's residual wounds were increasing. After Yona realized that the two men were not even attempting to cut him deeply, he attempted increasingly bold and dangerous attacks. Is it still okay out there? If the situation seems to have exploded, I will inform you immediately. Wait, Dante. Has it started? That's not it. You called me a monster a little while ago, right? What suddenly? Monster. Unlike the name. Runkendal. This is a word accurately recorded in Valeria's record magic window. Why does Valeria's record refer to Sister Jonah as a monster? But if it's Joshua, is there a reason why his name doesn't appear correctly in the record magic? Well, it could be because we accepted chaos and became a completely new being. Of course, I can't be sure, it's just a hunch. Suddenly a conversation I had with my colleagues before coming to Jiamwangxiang came to mind. If, as inferred at the time, it was because he accepted chaos and became a new being, then it should have been blanked out. Is there any difference between Yona and Runkendal? Then maybe it's not Yona? That's what I thought. I wondered if the prophet had created a clone of Jonah or something else, just as he had created a clone of Joshua. Furthermore, looking at the situation, it doesn't seem like it can be properly controlled. Tunnel. It's strange that this large tunnel was made just for Yona. If they had been thinking of sending more people, there would have been chaos outside already. It would be most effective to hit the outside while Dante and I are tied up here. If the Jonah in front of you is not the real Jonah, there is no reason to endure the pain and subdue him. And that Jonah had no resemblance to the Jonah Jean knew. If you were Jonah, you would have suffered at least once. Even if a being like Helurum or Gleek, rather than a prophet, had directly encroached on you, they would have suffered from fighting me at least once. The Jonah Jean knew was that kind of person. Because of the chaos, he is always in a dangerous state, and because of the chaos, he has been killing people for a long time without any particular reason, and because of the chaos, he has always made others tremble with fear. A person who overcame that terrible chaos and eventually came to love Jean and his family. The youngest sister who weaved green roses for Jean even though she constantly heard voices telling her to kill humans. Get out, Dante. Jean, are you really planning on giving up on Yona? Don't do that. I don't think so. I'll buy some time, so go and bring Yuria. Princess Yuria? It may not be Jonah. I'll explain the details later. I can't deal with it alone for long. It was only natural that the two of them had to be prepared to suffer significant injuries in order to subdue Yona. Because they are just greeting me like a scarecrow. I will come back as quickly as possible. When Dante turned his back, Jonah's blade came rushing in. Jean blocked Yona by striking away the vaguely visible sword. Before, I felt like I was going crazy with a dirty, ominous feeling that I didn't know why, but now I feel like I can breathe and my head is clearing. I don't think you're real for some reason. Pick dash. Jonah's sword scratched Jin's cheek. Jean still didn't catch her. Took about 10 minutes to deal with Jonah alone. Jean was covered in blood, but his breathing and movements did not change at all. Instead, the sense that had encompassed the outside world was now focused only on Jonah. Jean. Appa Jean. Dante gritted his teeth as soon as he saw the blood-soaked Jean, but Yuria could tell at a glance that there were no deep wounds, so she wasn't that shocked. What about outside? This time Jean asked Dante. I'm fine. Are you okay? Appa Jean is okay. And that person. Yuria concentrates for a moment and unleashes Asmil's power. Her eyes turned green as she grasped the truth about Jonah. It's not Jonah. Are you a clone like Joshua? I don't think that's it, it's just a soulless battle doll. It looks that way to me. Are you sure it's not Jonah? Absolutely not. As soon as Yuria's confirmation was finished, Jin's legs gave out and he fell to one knee on the floor. I felt an indescribably deep sense of relief at the fact that Jonah wasn't real. Of course, fake Jonah rushed forward to finish Jean off, and Dante was scared and fired his sword to protect Jean. Jonah's sword was faster than that sword. However, Jean knelt down and swung Bradamante, striking away the false sword of Jonah and cutting off his head. Yeah, I thought so. Our Yona sister couldn't have been like this. The fake Jonah, whose head fell off, struggled for a moment and then oxidized and disappeared. A single black lump remained where it disappeared. Thanks to the discovery and disposal of the Tunnel of Chaos under the Imperial Castle, the public sentiment in the Empire toward Jean and Dante skyrocketed once again. Articles about this incident poured in every day. As always, praise letters are coming from all over, so that Dino Jaglon doesn't even need to add his strength to public opinion. Even the ministers who were secretly dissatisfied with Dante for being overworked became even more loyal to Dante. If it weren't for Dante and Jean, no one would have figured out what was turning the Empire upside down. Hylon's second castle. Since demolition began, the Empire has been using this place as a temporary imperial castle. After the long meeting that had just ended, Jean, his colleagues, the nameless King Owl, and the best assassin Bison remained in Dante's office. I apologize for the length of the meeting, Sir Owl. No, it's because we came too early, Owl said in a low voice. He looked very tired as he continued to smoke with glazed eyes. Those gathered in the office were fixated on the black lump on the table. Items left over from decapitating the fake Jonah. It wasn't Owl's first time seeing it. I assumed we had lost track of Jonah, but I had no idea it ended up in the Garden of Swords. Nameless was calling the black mass that the party was currently seeing Yona's runaway trace. Traces of the runaway began to be discovered very recently, and as the name suggests, it was a kind of chaotic condensation that was left behind whenever Jonah ended his runaway. After the battle to subjugate Gleek, the chaos that Jonah harbored reacted to the remains of the bastard and tormented her again. As time passed, the runaway cycle became shorter and more dangerous, and now it has reached a point where it is impossible to catch Yona even if the entire unknown is attached. Owl winked and Bison opened the box next to him. It contained 6 runaway traces similar to those found in the underground castle. We had heard in advance that there were 6 more, but seeing them with our own eyes made the group feel even more uneasy. The reason for being so upset is no different. Valeria looked at the records of the traces of the runaway and found that the Prophet was creating a fake Jonah through the traces. Through the power of chaos. Owl, how many traces of the runaway did you miss? At least 3 and at most 5 or more. So that means there could be more than 5 fakes left. Moreover, in the worst case. No, there is a high probability that additional runaway traces will continue to be created. We are missing out. Owl nodded heavily. Is there any possibility that Yona was completely captured by the Garden of Swords? That won't be it. When you cut down the fake one, we had tracked down the real Jonah and fought a battle. Owl said, rolling up the right sleeve of the nameless man. There was a long black wound which I got while tracking down Yona a few days ago. There were no deaths because the search team consisted only of Owl and the top gunners. Even so, if Yona had targeted the best assassins first instead of Owl, Bison wouldn't be standing where he is right now. You were in pain after you almost killed me. That child now will be incomparably more dangerous than the fake you dealt with. Did you ever feel like Jonah was brainwashed by the Prophet? You must have seen at least once how enormous the power of chaos that child possesses. I also heard from Lord Soren in the past that the child's confusion was of a very special kind. I don't think the Prophet can easily control that. Your father said that. Okay. Is Soren's expedition still out of contact? Yes. Owl closed his eyes once at Jin's calm answer. He also did not think that Soren and the expedition team would still be alive. As soon as Jonah's work is finished, I will send someone from Mumyong. Thank you, Owl. Anyway, let alone whether it is possible for a prophet to control Jonah's chaos. In the first place, even if the current sword garden was great, it would be difficult to catch that child in a short period of time. However, unlike us, they will be able to create fakes just by obtaining traces of this runaway. As far as tracking and assassinating targets, Nameless had superior abilities than Runkendal before he was tainted by chaos. Since such an unknown person had been unable to catch Jonah for several years, Owl was confident that even the Prophet could do nothing about it. You said that the last place you lost your sister was Akin. Currently unknown, the last place where Yona was lost is Lutero, the kingdom of Akin in the Magic Federation. This is where Jean defeated the Dark Organization Tessing and obtained Malta's rune and Shuziel's magic book Jet. He will still be staying in Akin since the remaining search teams are not reporting much. Even if you leave, it will still be part of the Lutheran Magic Federation. The farther Jonah's location was from Hupister, the better. Especially now, thanks to the temporary alliance, we were able to receive help from Jeep. However, unlike Valeria, Jean did not want to receive any help from the entire Jeep. Yona's case is different from her teacher. Valeria is a person who is absolutely necessary for Jeep. Therefore, he accepted Jin's unreasonable demands in exchange for only traces of magical power. But it wasn't Jonah. If possible, Zippel would like to use this opportunity to eliminate Yona. Right now it's impossible to control her even in the unknown due to her outburst, but it's obvious that Yona will be on Jin's side from the moment she comes back to normal. Therefore, from Jeep's point of view, there was no reason to capture Yona alive. Even if Jean requested to be captured alive, there were plenty of reasons to refuse. Either conclude that civilians in Akin may be harmed by the runaway, or that Yona's capture is impossible due to his inaction. Of course, the moment Jonah is killed, the alliance may be threatened to be broken. But that would be nothing more than risking the fate of the entire world and making a fuss. Al was also thinking the same thing. I need to get help from Jeep, but I'm worried. Unlike us, they have no reason to save Jonah. But honestly, I feel frustrated because if I don't notify Zippel, there will inevitably be a situation where civilian damage will occur or Zippel will be exposed to a weakness. Has Yona ever gone berserk and killed civilians? Owl made eye contact with Jean in response to the heavy question. Does not exist. Really? Yes, I swear not. It seemed like Jonah had focused all of his indiscriminate desire for murder on me and the nameless assassins. Owl exhaled a puff of cigarette smoke. It's probably because that child was thinking of you 12 horsemen. Jean sweeps his chest. After meeting Jin, Jonah stopped killing people without reason. She was always wary of chaos and her efforts were still effective. What should I do? Owl felt devastated as he asked that question. I felt a sense of shame at the fact that I was asking Jean about an unnamed matter, no matter how strong Jean is. No physical transformation has occurred yet, and it appears to be resistant to chaos as is total cannibalization. We need to find the purifier as soon as possible before it becomes unusable. So does that mean it's better to get Zippel's help, even if it means risking Jonah being eliminated? Yes, but I don't plan on talking to Jeep's leaders. Owl's eyes narrowed. Then, Tower Keepers Hito and Sandra Zippel. I will only accept help from 2 people. Those 2 will probably help me find my sister without informing Zippel. Hito and Sandra had already sent a request to meet anyway. We had to look at the sword of Hito, which is presumed to be the entrance to the 6th tomb, in order to make them completely members of the Bamel Alliance. Can we trust them, or does Sandra Zippel have that much power? Owl didn't say anything like that to Jean. It was because I felt like I could see the poetry of my youth in Jean. Jin's words carried that much weight. I get it. Then our Nameless will search for a kin again from now on. Also, could you infiltrate the personnel who are not being mobilized to search for Sister Yona into Huffister? I will do that. I don't think we can maintain our neutral position in these times. As of today, Nameless will officially become a member of the Bamul Alliance. Since it is a coalition matter, it would of course be right to step forward. I will send someone as soon as I hand over the list of rescue targets. Thank you, Owl. I will have a Red Owl and colleagues on standby, so please contact Tychon as soon as you find Yona. Owl stood up and shook Jin's hand. That brazen kid from a few years ago has already grown up and has me under his feet. It's something that even your father couldn't achieve, so it's okay to be proud of it. I don't think of myself as being below me, just a member of the Bamul coalition. Still, I believe you will turn a blind eye to the previously promised return of Mandoju. I would do anything to save that child. I can finally say this honestly. Owl cleared his throat as if he was embarrassed. Yona is actually our unknown youngest daughter princess and greatest treasure. Not only me, but everyone cares about Jonah. Not only your family, but perhaps even more than you. Even if the child loses the ability to kill, that fact will never change. Although it feels like a special confession, Owl and the unknown members have always shown an infinite weakness towards Yona. Therefore, everyone felt that those words were not new, but Owl continued to clear his throat. Although Yona was not aware of it, her subconscious also considered Nameless to be her family. So even while the chaos is encroaching on him, he only tries to cause trouble to his family. If it's not your family, you won't be able to be forgiven by anyone when Sancte returns. Sometimes there are people who seem to share more blood than one another. For me, my colleagues and my brothers from the Ming dynasty were like that, and for Yona it would be an unknown thing. I think it would be nice if we could all welcome her when she comes back. Tychon Litra Refreshment Shop. Mr. Jean, do you know that? Sandra Ziffel is very happy these days. Wow. Sandra said, biting into a Litra cookie. Hito, who was sitting next to her, wiped the cookie crumbs off Sandra's mouth with an expressionless face, and Jean got the feeling that they were closer to father and daughter than butler and host. Usually in situations like this, it's polite to ask why you're happy. It's true that the word politeness can come out of the young lady's mouth. Really, what? I'm thrilled. I hope you will continue to think about courtesy and dignity. What can I say? You have no manners from the start. Don't ordinary people feel intimidated just by looking at those useless lumps of muscle? Stop spilling the cookies. Why on earth can't I eat it without spilling it, whether it was when I was 5 years old or now? Why do you do that when Hito takes care of everything? Then I guess I won't be able to help you from today onwards. Then I will rip you to death. Jean even had the impression that they were like a pair of comic actors. When I quietly listened to the two people talking, I often burst into laughter. Why do I feel good? Sandra Ziffel. That's because I see him quite often these days. It's okay to ask the obvious, haha. I see. telling the pureblood Zippel and the unidentified superhuman tower keeper to betray Zippel. Except for Baradin, I never imagined that the day would come when I would say something like that to another Jeep. It is Hito who holds the key, not Sandra. On the surface, Hito was absolutely obedient to Sandra, but Jean thought that Hito had the actual leadership between them. Of course, Hito follows Sandra's words in most cases, including things that do not make sense. But there was a certain line. If Sandra made a request that crossed that line, Hito would never comply and Sandra would swear or pester her, but that was all. Hito has the final decision on the matter. The young lady always shows such a good attitude, so the 12th rider frequently tells her to come and go. Romantic relationships sometimes require push and pull mystery. This means that Jean Runkendal cannot find the young lady attractive. I think that's worth listening to. But as far as I know, Hito has never been in a relationship, so how do you know so well? There are 24 hours in a day, lady. And I'm not with you for about 5 hours on average. So you're saying that you took advantage of those 5 hours to have a relationship? Tower keeper. Jean asked. I was really curious. Hito only spoke as a second-class deacon and tower keeper, but in reality he was serving as the highest-ranking Jeep official. In that case, there will be a lot of work to be done during the remaining 5 hours, but the question arises as to whether it is possible to have a relationship during that time. Okay. Is that strange? It's a little strange. It seems that being the top executive at Zippel is not as busy as I thought. Oh my God, I never thought Mr. Jean would be more interested in Hito than me. Are you crazy? Waving your tail like this? I'm not the highest ranking officer, I'm just a butler, the 12th rider. He's just a butler. Jin's eyes narrowed. Then I would like to propose a job change. There was no need to say it again. Great. Sandra immediately nodded with her eyes sparkling, but Hito's eyes became sharp. A job change offer? Exactly. Do you know what you are talking about? I know clearly. Then pretend you didn't hear it. Why again? Why aren't you going again, miss? Now the 12th horseman is telling me and the young lady to betray our family. What's wrong with that? I told you to do that before too. Miss, it may be because you feel like your mind is going back and forth, but this is something a 12 horseman should not say. The alliance is only temporary and Zippel and Runkendal are ultimately incompatible. It was only a few years ago that I almost got hit by Hito in the Soda Desert. Back then Hito overwhelmed Mr. Jean and his group, but what about now? What do you mean? Can you win? I don't think that will work. I had expected it since I had explored the Garden of Swords alone, but seeing it up close and in person was a different feeling. Look, Jean definitely has potential. I didn't think so at first either, so it's not Hito's fault. So why don't you do what I said last time? Oh, surprise. A conversation between Hito and Sandra in the Cauldron snowfields. In fact, Sandra had already been advocating for Hito to side with Jean. Hito is stubbornly refusing. Are you saying it's not possible simply because of the long-standing enmity between Zippel and Runkendal? Okay. You are not a pure-blood Jeep. I don't think I have any personal grudges against Runkendal or the Bamul Alliance. That's right, you're not a pureblood. A pureblood say I'm going to betray you, so why are you stopping me? I have no personal grudges. But now it's about to happen. Don't you feel like you are taking too much advantage of the young lady's love? It's a shame that Mr. Jean is taking advantage of me. And even if you use it, what's wrong with it? I just like it? It might seem that way. But I'm saying this not just for the benefit of my alliance or Runkendal, but for you. I meant it. Of course, Jean cannot understand Sandra's feelings for him, and the person she is feels like a mystery. After going through several events together with her over the past few years, I developed a kind of camaraderie and compassion. Because of this, Jean was convinced that as long as Sandra continued to be in Jeep, the future would ultimately be miserable. Sandra, please leave for a moment. I don't like that. Just stay here, lady. I'll make dinner later in about 30 minutes. I'll have a cup of tea with Enya and then I'll be back. When Sandra disappeared, only Jean and Hito remained in the tea shop. Hito looked uneasy and wiped his glasses and took out a cigarette. No smoking here. Hito's shirt buttons bounced on Jin's side as his muscles bulged even more. Hito lit the fire and burned off one cigarette in one breath. Gray smoke briefly obscured the two men's vision. I don't think there's any reason for me to be polite to you when you're crossing a line. Let me understand that much. Tower Keeper, from what I can see you are loyal to Sandra Ziffel, not Ziffel. Sandra Ziffel, not Ziffel. That was something I felt intuitively from the first time I saw Hito. The origin of that absolute loyalty is unknown, but it is said that if Hito had to choose between Ziffel and Sandra Ziffel, he would choose the latter. Am I wrong? Instead of answering, Hito took out another cigarette and burned it. I understand that means so I can't understand it even more. If Sandra Ziffel continues to be in the family, how do you think it will end? It will be the same as now. I met Baradin not long ago. He lost his memory and became a demonic swordsman biogolem, becoming a different person than before. I had a feeling that Sandra would end up falling victim to the experiment as well. You won't end up like that, Jean Runkendal. Is it because you protect Sandra Ziffel? Okay. I don't understand. The protection you are talking about means tolerating a certain level of experimentation on Sandra? Sandra is already a biological golem. She was able to use some of the power of time through some kind of method, and in addition to super regeneration, she possessed physical abilities that were uncharacteristic of a wizard. I believe that the somewhat unusual mental state that Sandra Ziffel has and the experiments she underwent may not be completely unrelated. Lady Sandra is inherently strange. It has nothing to do with the experiment. That's good, but is there any guarantee that will continue to be the case? If she turns like Baradin, can she really be called Sandra Ziffel? That is not for you to decide. It's not up to you to decide. It's up to Sandra to decide. Besides, what kind of protection is that? You will allow experiments up to the point where people are not completely damaged, and you will protect them beyond that. Are you really thinking like that when you stay with Sandra? I answered the call today to find out the identity of my sword, not to come to Taiken with the intention of becoming a traitor. And the experiment. Hito's brows narrowed as if a memory came to mind. This is what the young lady wanted. You sound cowardly. Even if Sandra wanted it, she wouldn't really think it was right to let her become a test subject. Or did you decide that, in order to protect Sandra under any circumstances, she needed at least that much regenerative ability? Then what can you do? What? Hito stood up. Let's say Miss Sandra betrayed Jeep. What's next? Can you and the Bamul Alliance always keep Miss Sandra as number one? Can you give priority to Miss Sandra even if the entire coalition is destroyed? Of course it's impossible. You are definitely strong. Now you will be stronger than me. However, when the fight with Rosa ended and the alliance was broken, I still could not picture you defeating Ziffel. It's the same even if I come under your wing and help you. So what you're saying is that I will bet Sandra's life on the one that you think is more likely. Okay. Even if Lord Soren had made the same offer instead of you, I would have rejected it. Now that I've said this, I hope you stop listening and give up. Then can I understand this to mean that I will accept your offer when I have the power to completely overwhelm Ziffel? Hito nodded without even thinking. As much as you want. If you give me that assurance, I can beg you to accept me and the lady even if you refuse. Eating Mr. Jin's own cooking. I just want to live here in Taiken like this. Right, Hito? Not at all, Mississippi. Why are you always so negative? I don't like what I'm doing these days more and more. If you keep doing this, you can let the family know about your misadventures. If that happens, you won't be able to come see the 12 Horsemen even if you have the opportunity like today. There's no trash, right? Do you think a snitch is suitable for someone of that size? It seems like a good combination. No one would think of me as a snitch based on my appearance, so it has its own uniqueness and charm. A day has passed since Hito and Sandra came to Taiken. And the colleagues who watched the two like Jean felt that the two were a good father and daughter, but the daughter was a very badass. No matter how much I roll Crayon Shinchan, I don't know about this jet. Why on earth is that amazing man so obsessed with Sandra Ziffel? I don't think I've found any weakness. It's a strange relationship. The very existence of that person named Hito is strange in the first place, Lord Bacchus. There is absolutely no information about the author of our ghosts, and isn't the same true for Black King Dan? The Lord also learned of its existence only after encountering it in person in the Soda Desert. Does it make sense that we don't know a person like that at all? It seems that Lord Soren and the highest level of Runkendal Jiffle knew about him. But it is true that he is a person shrouded in mystery in many ways. Tychon still knows little about Hito. He is the exclusive butler of Zippel Sandra and the second-class butler of Zippel, and yet he is treated as the best in the family. Hito was in a position where he could apply for leave in this situation, citing only the vague reason of personal history. The writing on the sword that Miss Valeria is examining also reads Veil. Since yesterday Valeria has been staying up all night looking at the records of Hito's sword Veil. Since the veil is an object related to Old Runkendal, its history has been manipulated as expected. Lord Hito. Bacchus visited Hito on behalf of everyone. You can just call me the Tower Keeper, Captain Black King. It is more convenient to call him sir. I called you because I had a question. What is it? I'm curious about the relationship between Sir and Sandra Zippel. Are you saying it's something to be curious about when a butler serves his master? Because they don't look like ordinary butlers and owners. I heard from Jean that Kyung is loyal to Sandra Zippel, not Zippel. I'll prepare good alcohol and cigarettes, so if you have a special story, can you tell me? Bacchus was a very friendly person. Hito also seemed not to be too bothered by Bacchus' sudden approach. Good alcohol and cigarettes are always welcome, but there is no particular story. Don't do that, just tell me. Tychon's work is almost paralyzed because of the curiosity about Sir and Sandra Zippel. Bacchus took out the finest pine smoke from Mila from his arms and held it out to Hito. Hito savored the scent and smiled with satisfaction. The quality is such that at most 1 carton can be produced per year from all Mila tobacco farms. Okay, I'll let you know. The group pricked up their ears. But the next moment Hito gave a very disappointing answer. There are often people who care more about their dogs or cats that they have raised for a long time than their own bodies. The reason I serve you is the same. I've been by your side ever since you were young, so now it's only natural. Comparing me to a pet? If I had to express it, I meant it to be so lady. Anyway, it's a small story compared to the cigarettes I received. I hope you are not disappointed. Then, in Jeep, how did you come to have enemies? Jet interjected, looking slightly at me. He also took out a different type of high-quality Mila pine smoke from Bacchus and offered it to Hito. It was stolen from Qual's drawer. There's no need to be so scared, Jet. I came to join Jeepel by chance while wandering around as a young man. This is also a very elegant scent. It looks like you're having a lot of fun ruining the lives of Tychon people, Tower Keeper. Jean shrugged his shoulders and said, If you have any questions, please ask. If you have anything that interests me. Is there really a need for that? If you become one of us, you will naturally know everything. If he asks Sandra, Jean will be able to find out much about Hito's past. But Jean didn't do that. There was no need to make a giant who could become an ally uncomfortable by revealing the past that he was trying to hide. His past isn't that important. The important thing was to enter the 6th tomb through the veil. And I'm more curious about the past of your sword than about your own past. I don't think I have told you yet, but the name Veil written on the blade is the name of a person believed to be an old Runkendal teenage knight. Like the guy I saw in the snowfield? A sea that I had some idea about. For me, it's a very bitter story that the teenage knight's sword is in the possession of Zippel's minions. Well, except for the fact that you are a member of Zippel, you are a warrior who is fully qualified to own a sword of that size. I thought even my father would tremble. I was just telling the truth. When I first met you, I thought you were such a monster. That won't change my mind. One of the reasons I need to impress you is because there is an issue related to Yona. As soon as Sandra and Hito arrived, Jean had asked them to help him find Jonah. For that matter, didn't the young lady agree yesterday? Ho, don't worry. I will somehow rescue my sister-in-law. I believe in Sandra, but I think you could report it to the top. You've been treated like a snitch twice. You can bring in a truth contractor to check. I'll leave it to you and trust you. I don't believe it, but the moment something goes wrong with Jonah Runkendall, he will try to scare Miss Sandra. So he probably thinks that I won't report it because I don't like it. I'm not that mean either. But if the other person is mean first, then there is nothing we can do. I don't mind being kidnapped by you. As the conversation continued to that point, Valeria came out of the lab. As always when something like this happens, his face was haggard, but there was one thing that was different from usual. Your eyes are quite sparkly? That was the look Valeria only gave when she made a particularly great discovery. Jean smiled inwardly as the sight reminded him of his past life. Jean, have you finished analyzing the records? Okay, follow me. I'll explain. When Jean left, Sandra glared at Valeria as if she were going to kill her, and Hito sighed and calmed her down. You seem excited. It looks like the harvest is bigger than expected, right? This sword contains the most complete record of Old Runkendall we have ever discovered. Didn't you say that the history of the sword was quite strongly manipulated? I said that, and I actually said that at first. But this is my first time experiencing something like this. Once my magic touched it, the history of this sword began to restore itself. Recover history yourself? Just as a dry forest swallows rainwater, Hito's sword slowly revived the records contained within it, as soon as Valeria's recording magic touched it. Valeria simply stayed in that state all night and did not take any special action to further restore the records. Okay, it is safe to say that this sword perfectly contains a fragment of Runkendall from 1,000 years ago. The condition is incomparable to the records we saw in Wantaramo Forest. Until now, Jean has never seen the complete records of Old Runkendall. Some or most of the records Jean saw were always damaged. Then it will show you more than the recording devices that Soderette left behind. Of course. Besides, maybe. Valeria paused for a moment and made eye contact with Jean. You might even meet a living Old Runkendall. In the grave within this sword. What? Jin's eyes widened. I thought about why the fabricated history was restored so easily. There may be some natural weakening over time, but that alone cannot explain it. It wasn't because my recording magic was great. As Valeria used recording magic on Hito's sword, she clearly felt that some vivid power within it was beginning to resist the manipulation of history. So what you're saying is that there is a living teenage knight in there responding to your recording magic and overcoming the manipulation of history? There is no law that says there is a teenage knight, but there is a very high possibility that someone is alive inside the sword. Not in the form of a guardian, but as a real living being. And if he is of sound mind and if he shows favor to you, you can hear stories from those days directly from him. My heart beat faster. If only I could hear the mysterious story of the Old Runkendall in person, many of the questions I have had so far could be resolved. In the first tomb, the background to why Sildurai called Soderette a traitor, the reality of the fabricated history, the death of Timar, and the end of Runkendall in those days. And the reason why Soderette hid the fact even though he had already identified himself as a contractor 1,000 years ago. That's an amazing story. I didn't expect to find such a clue in the sword held by Ziffel's Tower Keeper. I wouldn't have been able to enter the 5th tomb without that sword. Are you going to tell the Tower Keeper about this? I think it would be a good idea to let them know. He is a thorough person. When we finish the story and go back, he will ask Yuria to verify it. I already mentioned Yuria. If we find out that you lied, you will never cooperate with us. It was not a problem that could be resolved with refusal. Since Hito was the master of the sword, it seemed better to be honest unless it was taken from him by force. Of course, Hito is a Jeep character. It was very uncomfortable to inform him of the existence of the Old Runkendall who might be alive. But there was no other way. For now, killing the Tower Keeper or taking the sword from him would be crazy, so that would be better. When are you going to enter the grave? We need to get ready now. You never know what might happen during the opening process, so it might be a good idea to try it outside. An uninhabited island in Taiken territorial waters. Jean chose this place as the place to open the subspace of the 6th tomb sword. In preparation for any emergency, Jean and Taiken strongmen, as well as the sword's masters Hito and Sandra, were stationed in the middle of the uninhabited island. Are we going to spread spiritual energy and open subspace like last time? Perhaps so. To be precise, it is injected into the sword. Hito adjusted his glasses as if he were distrustful. Didn't you say that location conditions must be met for Timar's tomb to be opened in the Cauldron Snowfield's 12 riders? I don't think this deserted island fits that criteria. Not all graves were like that. Even back then, I just made an assumption due to the sudden situation. Hito shrugged and handed the sword to Jean. Jean accepted the sword and smiled at Hito. Don't you think it's somehow fateful, Tower Keeper? What are you talking about all of a sudden? Suddenly I wonder if it was just a coincidence that you obtained this sword after 1,000 years. The combination of the old teenage knight and Jeep's butler is not like that. What a useless fatalism. I just want to placate you by invoking useless fatalism. By any chance? Maybe you are a descendant of a teenage knight named Bale. That's why the sword found you. It's not a coincidence. It's a romantic story, honey. Young lady, it's not romantic at all. Why does our stupid butler think like that? When the head of the family first accepted me into the family confirmed all my identity. You know, right? Those lowly guys who abandoned Hito. I remember, even though I couldn't see his face in person because he was already dead. Did you hear the 12 horsemen? My parents were humble commoners and criminals. She abandoned her child because she felt overwhelmed and sometimes visits the orphanage out of guilt, but she never picks him up again. They were the kind of criminals who would soon stop walking when the guilt became bearable. Even as he said those words, Hito didn't seem to have any change of heart. In fact, he did not feel much toward his parents who abandoned him right after he was born. I never missed it or even hated it. Furthermore, the family even confirmed their roots, and it turned out to be a merchant family from the fallen Urad kingdom. It means that whoever is inside the sword cannot be my ancestor. It's a disappointing story. Now I see that not only you but you need to learn the mystery of push and pull. If you rush to me saying you want me like that, won't it make you feel even more excited? I'll keep it in mind. Jean smugly licked his lips, pretending to be disappointed. Hito was somewhat disgusted by that sight and thought he should have beaten him up more in the soda desert. Soon Jean changed his expression and looked around at the people. From now on I will infuse the sword with spiritual energy. It would be great if the tomb was opened without difficulty, but we don't know what variables may arise, so everyone please remain vigilant. Yes, my lord. I understand, my lord. When Jean released his spiritual energy, the entire area immediately began to darken. Even though it was broad daylight, night seemed to have arrived in an instant and the dazzling sunlight was obscured by a black curtain. As expected, a large amount of spiritual energy is needed this time. I entered with almost all of my spiritual energy exhausted and felt a bit nervous, perhaps because of the memories of the last tomb where I fought a difficult battle with Runtia. Also, he might face a burdensome opponent with his spiritual energy exhausted. Above all, there is a high possibility that a living figure of old Runkendal exists within this sword. He, like the tomb guardians he had met so far, could attack Jean with all his might, and a teenage knight could not have been weaker than Runtia. He's a living member of the old Runkendal. This was possible because subspace is a dead world, or it could be something that has a lifespan of thousands of years like dragons or demons. I have never received any information that all of the teenage knights are human. Or it could be in a sealed state, like Alona Ziffel. Spiritual energy spread without end. Then it poured down into the sword once and was absorbed, and those watching could not even estimate the size of the spiritual energy that Jean was handling. It reminds me of Muraken's spiritual energy liberation in his heyday. I thought that idiot had found his strength, but he couldn't even help Jean because he was trying to replace Misha. It would have been reassuring to have that guy at a time like this. In the Cauldron Snowfields, the tomb refused entry to anyone except Jin. In the past, the group had entered the tomb together to confront Guardian Sarah, so Quicantel was hoping that they could do the same this time. A long time has passed like that. The spiritual energy is being injected like crazy, but I can't feel any change from the sword. If things continued like this, it would soon run out of spiritual energy, but Hito's sword remained steadfast. It did not emit light or form a gate like it did in the Cauldron Snowfields. Jean, does something feel different from last time? Couldn't that redhead have brought some wrong information? Sandra said, glaring at Valeria. Valeria did not react and just watched Jean and the sword. If I fail like this, do I have to find out how to open the sword door through recording magic again? Things like locational conditions. In my opinion, red hair is pure nonsense. It's strange that the living old Runkendel is inside the sword in the first place. I'm curious too. Oh, but if what the redhead said is true, the door suddenly opened. What if that Runkendel attacks Jean? Like in the snowfields of Caldron. Wouldn't the problem you have to worry about be if that old Runkendel becomes an ally of the 12 Horsemen? I hope you wish. That's a good thing for Mr. Jean, so how can I worry about that? I lost my roots and family to you and have been chased for a long time, Valeria said in a low voice. He didn't even look at Sandra. What redhead? I feel like tearing you to death, so I'm asking you to shut up and focus on your work. Because everyone had no choice but to gather together to work. Valeria still didn't look at Sandra, but Sandra blinked at the chilling death in that low voice. And just as Sandra was about to scream, suddenly Hito's sword began to vibrate and change for the first time. Is subspace about to open? Fortunately, I don't think there will be any major problems. Quicantel interrupted. It was because I saw Jin's expression. Are you okay, Jean? Self? Jin's face, which had been expressionless the whole time, was filled with embarrassment. The reason is no different. It looks like the Tower Keeper's sword is about to fly somewhere. Since Jean was injecting spiritual energy himself, he was more aware of the changes that had begun in the sword than anyone else. And from what he felt, Hito's sword seemed to have chosen to move, instead of opening the door like last time. Before less than 3 seconds had passed, Jean was sure. The fact that the sword will soon fly out somewhere. I tried to block the flow of spiritual energy into the sword, but the sword had already gained enough power to move. Like a magic cannon being fired. Suddenly the sword in front of Jean's sword into the sky, tearing the black curtain that covered the sky. It looked as if Runkendel's secret weapon, the speed of light, had been unleashed into the sky. The space was distorted by the speed at which the sword flew, and everyone gathered on the island looked up at the sky. Oh, Hito's sword exploded like a firecracker. Hito is jumping up and down. He landed on the ground without being able to hold on to his sword. Meanwhile, Hito couldn't help but make a bewildered expression as he saw the sword moving further away. Hold it! Cried Quicantel. However, the sword that had been flying in a straight line had already turned and was flying somewhere. Jin's spiritual energy absorbed by the sword even left a long trace in the sky like a comet's tail. In the blink of an eye, the sword was more than a mile away from the gathered people. Intuitively, Jean guessed that the sword was flying in search of a space to open its subspace. In that case, the opening of the tomb was a success, but it was not a very good situation. There is no way to chase that sword right away. Red Owl was put on standby at the unknown side and Mort was injured, and even if those two were there in the first place, it would be difficult to chase down the sword in that condition. Because it is not moving through black space but pure ultra-high-speed flight. None of those who were looking at the sword now had any memory of seeing a flying object moving faster than me. Mr. Quicantel. Jean called Quicantel. Because you have to chase the sword. I get it. Quicantel quickly unleashed the power of time and transformed into his true form. However, the sword appeared to be moving far into the sky, narrowly avoiding the power of time. Those who had gathered climbed onto Quicantel's back in perfect order. Quicantel immediately began flying at full speed, but it was difficult to keep up with the sword. Try to follow the traces of spiritual energy left behind by the sword. Fortunately, Hito's black contrail went forward, leaving behind a long trail of spiritual energy. The sword had already gone far enough to be invisible, but if you followed the traces you would be able to reach the sword's destination. The problem was that it was impossible to know where the final destination was, and that the sword's flight was prolonged. This is a completely unexpected situation. I thought that, if there was a problem opening the tomb, it would be a battle with the Tomb Guardian, but I never thought the sword would fly like that. And it leaves so many traces. The fact that the sword leaves traces all over the sky and flies for a long time means that this situation can be exposed to forces other than Taiken. What if by the time the sword arrives at its destination all forces such as the Sword Garden Zippel-Kinzel and the Imperial family have gathered there? It might still be burdensome for temporary allies to do such nonsense, but it's not the Garden of Swords. If we were to be honest, we could have come up with a picture of all the great powers gathering in Timar's sixth tomb. Hito's murderous gaze landed on Jin's back. Looks like this is a problem you didn't expect at all. However, if I lose my sword in this situation, it won't be much fun. 12 Horsemen. The sword flew for 4 full days. It swept across the entire continent and sea without stopping for 4 days. The speed was so fast that the party was only able to chase after it for the first 10 minutes or so, and from then on they continued to rely on the air defenses and eyewitness accounts of their allies. Where the hell is your destination? Quikantel said in a voice full of anger. Due to a sudden emergency that no one expected, she is unable to sleep for 4 days and is flying around the world. Of course, flying for about 4 days is not a big deal for a dragon, but flying at full speed almost every moment was beyond its strength. I never thought the day would come when I would have to chase the sword. My sword, my sword. Can I find it? Like all warriors, Hito treasured his long sword very much. Not only is there no blacksmith of the modern era who can create something like that, but the fact that it was the reward he received after fighting the monster of the Black Sea in his youth was also an element of affection for him. Since such a sword has been swinging the sky for 4 days now, Hito can't help but feel upset. With a pale complexion that did not match her muscular build, Sandra continued to give me boring and insincere words of comfort. It's a pity that the sword ran away, but thanks to that we've been on a public date with him for 4 days, Hito. Let's think positively. It will be a memory I will never forget. Those riding on Quikantel's back admired Hito, who never did any harm to Sandra. Slowly the outline of our destination has become clear, Mr. Quikantel. Please try a little harder. Tower Keeper, please be patient a little longer. All I can say is that I am sorry. Until the day before yesterday, Hito's sword was just running wild in all directions like a mad dog. It headed north, then turned south, then east, and then back again, driving those chasing it crazy. It almost got the feeling that the sword was planning to make fun of people. Of course, in those 2 days, the Garden of Swords and Zippel-Kinzel, of course. What is that? Is something like a distant black meteor falling? Oh my gosh, isn't that a remnant of chaos? You have to run away. With fishermen from all over the sea. Could that be a remnant of Lake Chaos? After that, the silver dragon Quikantel is chasing me. Oh, I can see the 12 Horsemen and Bamul Alliance too. Have you seen anything about suppressing chaos? Jean Runkendel. A toast to His Highness the Regent and Jin Runkendel. I also got to know people from all kinds of cities who were leading peaceful lives under the protection of the Bamul Alliance and the Dante Giants. In other words, in just 4 days there were more people in the world who knew about this situation than those who did not. Secretly entering Timar's sixth tomb has become impossible. Sorry? If I apologize, will the veil come back to me? Later I will take responsibility in some way and compensate for this damage. It's already become impossible to turn back. My wife and I have already been exposed to the family ships. As they said, in the process of tracking the sword, the party had already encountered chasers from other forces several times. This meant that Runkendel's Chaos Dragon, the Black Ship Kinzelo, and Zippel's Ship Dragon all saw Sandra and Hito. Lord Hito? Isn't that girl Sandra next to you? Why did the two of you go on vacation with the 12 Horsemen? Now that I think about it, that flying object is very similar to Lord Hito's sword. In particular, Hito's large muscular body was so unique that anyone who saw it once could recognize it from afar, so it was impossible to pretend that it was not. That doesn't mean I didn't pretend it wasn't the case, but it meant it was useless. Therefore, Hito was already at a loss to go back and explain. Currently, the Bamul Alliance and Zippel are in a temporary alliance, and Hito originally receives very special treatment within the family. The problem was that it was not reported in advance. Why is that a problem? Anyway, it's obvious that the moment Hito goes out with me, I'm going to go on a date with Mr. Jean. It's a problem because you didn't report in advance that the 12 horsemen were trying to help you examine the sword, young lady. Tower Keeper, why didn't you report that? It was because I didn't want to get tired. Hito did not inform the family that the veil played a decisive role when entering the fifth tomb last time. Of course he had already confirmed all of his ancestors, but if Ziffel thought there was some connection between him and old Runkendel, he would have had to go through many frustrating procedures. In addition, when escaping from the snowy field, he was hiding the fact that he had escaped earlier than the other jeeps due to losing, so it was not an uncomfortable situation for Hito. Because I didn't know things would turn out this way. Although Hito lost his temper with Jean the whole time, he actually thought that all of this was due to his negligence. Is it because I was too picky with the consideration of the family head and leaders? I was too complacent. I wasn't too worried about being reprimanded for this incident in the future. The problem was Sandra. Is it because you protect Sandra Ziffel? Okay. I don't understand. By the protection you are talking about, do you mean tolerating a certain level of experimentation on Sandra? The conversation I had with Jean before the sword went wild. As the saying goes, it is all thanks to Hito's presence that Sandra has been able to avoid a very fatal level of experimentation. Ziffel knew exactly what Hito wanted. What he wanted was not greater power, a chance to fight a stronger opponent, or to become the world's #1 person. Only for Sandra's survival. That's why Ziffel turned a blind eye even when Hito often broke the rules. Even if something unpleasant happened because he was involved, there was no serious investigation. In the end, all the results of Hito's work always benefited Sandra and Jeep. But this case is different. If Jean became stronger again due to Hito's sword, or if there was a problem with the manipulation of history in the old Runkendel, Hito had nothing to say even if Ziffel threatened Sandra. If a full-scale investigation begins, it may be revealed that I killed the ghosts in the Soda Desert last time, and that I let the 12 horsemen go by pretending to be attacked by Anas. Hito hoped that this matter would end neatly so that that would not happen. But his wish cannot come true. Ha ha ha. The sword stopped, Quicantel said, breathing heavily. In the middle of the territorial sea, which Huffister calls the Sea of Swords and the Lutero Magic Federation calls the Sea of Magic. Quicantel passed by here on the first day of his flight, and now he says his destination was on the sea? Maybe it was just a brief pause. Fortunately, I don't think that was the case. When Jean answered, the sword stopped there for the first time since it started moving. The blade, which slowly rotated like a clock hand, was soon aimed at the sea, as if stabbed. Pying Suwaia. The sword struck the middle of the sea with a tremendous roar that tore through the air and exploded. Then something surprising happened. Ku. The sea literally turned upside down. As if a giant had thrown together several mountains and thrown them like stones, an indescribably huge ripple occurred, and the rising sea water reached the point where it reached the clouds. Quicantel and his colleagues deployed a protective shield to push back the seawater. A feeling as heavy as the sincere attack of a fairly superhuman was conveyed in the seawater. Maybe the whole world was shaken for a moment. And the power that Hito's sword exploded was all Jin's spiritual energy absorbed 4 days ago. It takes a long time for such an uproar to subside. The sea will continue to struggle for a while, pushing the tsunami all the way to the land, and there is nothing else people can do until the disaster is over. However, what the sword caused was not a disaster but a divine discovery. The spiritual energy pouring from the sword was moving on its own, touching the bare skin of the sea below. The image of spiritual energy seeping into the seabed continued, as if touching a forgotten and dusty precious object. Master Yongi is pulling up something that looks like a building from the ground, Bacchus said with wide eyes. All my colleagues were looking at the same scene. Like a legend commonly heard in any region, a hidden civilization under the sea is being revealed. Even Hito, who had been overcome with worry, just now looked at the sight in fascination for a moment. Everyone watching was in awe. In the past, when all Mango cut through the sea and pulled out a huge clam, it was shocking, but compared to the scenery before the group's eyes now, even that felt trivial. Wow, honey, is that your ancestor's 6th grave? Jean was about to answer when he made eye contact with Valeria. Didn't you say it's a subspace that exists inside the sword? Bamul Union Sword Garden Zippel Kinselo. I had no idea that they would all end up in Timar's sixth tomb together. Starting from the possibility of meeting the living old Runkendal to the current situation with the flight of the sword. The opening of this tomb was unexpected in every way. Whoa! The spiritual energy that continued to escape from the sword was creating a huge whirlpool. Although it was hidden by the Black Sea water structures and some devices appeared on the seafloor as each second passed. A collapsed castle, a broken spire, and unidentified devices that look like some kind of defensive equipment. The subspace that the sword contained was not normal, as if it had already been destroyed several times. Still, an unknown sense of crisis was making the back of Jin's neck feel cold. Is it because of the Guardian? Except for when he met Leet Damaro Yul, a living old Runkendal figure, whom he couldn't remember, Jin would run into danger every time he opened the tomb. This time too my whole body was sending out signals that I was in danger. The source of the signal was not felt by the chase team sent from the Garden of Swords but rather from the bottom of the sea. All the spiritual energy used to open the tomb was recovered during the visit, so there are no problems during the mission. We decided to exclude the assumption that the Guardian would be good at identifying enemies. They're probably going to attack indiscriminately, and I thought it would be a good idea to take advantage of that and clear out the enemies first. The problem is with Jeep and Kinselo. To what extent should we protect them? Jin, who had been thinking about that far, shook his head. They're not children, so I don't need to worry about them. If he thought it was an important issue, he would have sent the appropriate manpower. If it were a temporary alliance issue, support would have been requested in advance, but this was more of Jin's personal problem. For example, since they came to interfere in personal affairs, there was no need to protect them diligently even if they did not threaten to cause harm. Anyway, Kinselo can feel the energy of Bianca Caligo and Ranka Hallowis, so even if Zephyrin can't use his power, they will protect him. Zippel said that since Cadden was receiving treatment, Octavia or Ronald would have come, but they are not at a level where they cannot maintain their health. Sword Garden, Ziffel, Kinselo's ship, and the dragons were getting closer. Jin fired a beam of light in the direction of the Chaos Dragon and the Black Ship. As the lightning-charged light speed surged, the charging Chaos Dragon and Black Ship oxidized, leaving behind a residue of chaos. A sword plunged into the center of the dazzling energy emitted by the forces of each power, a sea that was turned upside down as if creating a world. While everything was coming together like a scene from a myth, a guardian was finally appearing from the bottom of the sea. No, the guardians. Master, there are gigantic beings at the bottom of the sea. Jin looked down. Ominous red eyes like distant forest fires were looking up at the intruders. A huge body like a castle and a huge spear and shield with a majesty to match. The human-shaped giants seemed to be made of hard rock that even Jin could not easily cut. Among the group, except for Jin and Hito, their bodies almost stiffened from the intimidation. Not just one or two. At first glance, over 100 giants were preparing to slaughter the intruders. The number even increased in real time, but rather than popping out from a building or underground, it was outlined in the air and formed after a while. Is that a graveyard giant? Quicantle sighed and said, Graveyard giant. It's an ancient weapon that almost put Jin's youngest division in danger when he was a cadet. It was Buvar Gaston's work that threatened the youngest division at the time, and Murakan defeated it at once. At that point, Murakan had barely regained his strength. Even if something like that was just one, it would have been impossible to suppress. Does that make a difference because it is the original and not Buvard's work? However, looking at the atmosphere of Quicantle, it seemed that was not the case. Quicantle, do you know about those? Bacchus asked. You know very well that our dragon clan killed all the remaining graveyard giants 2,000 years ago. It was a war in which Murakan and I also participated. But now those graveyard giants are a different type from the ones we destroyed. Well, the god of sculpture? Is this your first time hearing this name? It's obvious that you don't know. Like Clam, whom we met in Cologne, he is one of the gods who disappeared from history. Well was said to have been in the tombs of dead gods. A conversation I had with Murakan in the past about the graveyard giant. As far as the dragons know, the graveyard giant is a weapon created by Well, the god of sculpture. Created to protect himself, who had been reduced to an ordinary human and the tombs of forgotten gods. Quicantle's expression distorted. Arya said a little while ago that this tomb doesn't seem to be Soderet's subspace, right? Yes, Soderet's name is not listed in the record window. Apparently this is not Timar but the tomb of a dead god. It's probably different from the tomb that our dragon clan disposed of. Then it was originally the tomb of a dead god, but when Timar's tomb was moved it could have been used as his tomb for a while. Probably so. Ugh! Suddenly Quikanthal shook his head as if he was in pain. Like when Murakan reacts to his own memories that have been manipulated and forgotten. The teenage knight who decided to guard this place. He was a person related to the dead god who was the original owner of this tomb. It was impossible to remember any more than that. Quikanthal gathered his wits and exhaled heavily. Maybe I can meet him and ask him, what are the stories behind this tomb? The fact that Quicanthal's memories are starting to return is proof that the old Runkendal is alive and well inside this place. Jean nodded at Valeria's words. It's a great harvest tower keeper. I have a favor to ask. You're so shameless. It's getting worse. Are you asking me for a favor in this situation? I will take care of all the graveyard giants by myself. So don't just protect Sandra, please take care of my colleagues as well. No, I will leave as soon as I find the sword. Jean shakes his head apologetically. If it is possible, do it. But I can read spiritual energy and that sword is now firmly fixed so that no one can pull it out. Jean said, pointing at the sword. It wasn't a lie. Jean was convinced that even if he used all his spiritual energy again, he would not be able to pull out Hito's sword from the bottom of the sea again. Moreover, the sword was no longer the unusually long sword that Hito was familiar with. What kind of strange shape does my sword have? Maybe that's the true form of the sword you have. Valeria shrugged her shoulders and answered for Jean. It would be appropriate to describe it as having horns growing on its sword body. Hito, who had raised his senses, was gritting his teeth as he looked at the small blades sticking out on both sides of the sword body. 12 horses, whoa! In the end, Hito exploded and screamed. In the past, he had frequently experienced situations that worsened to this extent, but this was the first time it had happened since he met Sandra. No matter how crazy Sandra acted, Hito was never in a situation where she couldn't control it. It was impossible for Hito to give up his sword and escape. Even at the minimum, the size of the subspace formed in the sea is about 10 li. Since it was in the middle of the sea, it was impossible to escape by running, and the biggest problem was the layered curtains of spiritual energy. The veil was not going to disappear unless it swallowed up all the intruders. Already some of the people from the Garden of Swords and Zippel were sucked into the tent, leaving behind deathly screams. There was no need to even imagine what would happen to those who were absorbed into the veil. Flesh and remnants of swords and wands were pouring out of the surface on the other side of where they had been captured. This place was already hell. I am truly sorry. Since the situation has come to this, I have no choice but to suggest the best direction. After the matter is over, I will definitely apologize and compensate. Jean also wanted to apologize more properly, but the graveyard giants had started to move, so he ended it briefly. Lord Quikanthal, Lord Baka's tower keeper, please take care of your colleagues. Let's get this done as quickly as possible. Hey Hito. He's trying to get to those monsters on his own, so throw yourself in and help him too. While Hito was making strange noises, as he was barely able to hold on to his senses, Valeria grabbed Jin's shoulders. I'm coming down with you, Jean Runkendal. What? Why you? Of course, that was Sandra's reaction, not Jean's. Other colleagues also felt puzzled. It is difficult to understand why Valeria is trying to fight in a fight that even Bakas cannot participate in. But Jean followed her words without even thinking. I would appreciate it if you could. Maybe it was in her past life, but the current Valeria is by no means the type of person who would run to her death just because she was worried about Jean. Therefore, her coming forward meant that she was confident. Valeria naturally extended her hand to Jean. It had no particular meaning, just meant to descend together for battle, but Sandra's blood couldn't help but boil. This person, this pair, what are you doing? Stop. My tongue is dizzy. Miss. In the end, Sandra fell unconscious as if she couldn't bear to see that happen. Hito still took care of Sandra, and Jean held Valeria's hand. It was my teacher's hand that I had held for the first time in a long time. Wouldn't it be possible in this life to share the heavy burdens held in these thin and fragile hands? No, maybe we are already sharing it together. Jean suddenly had this thought. Eggplant. When Jean and Valeria jumped off Quickantle's back, the graveyard giants fired red rays of light as if they had been waiting. Jean's brain energy and Valeria's blue magic mixed together and illuminated the dark seabed. Jean felt the sense of crisis that had chilled the back of his neck when subspace first opened was quickly fading. Red pillars were rising from the bottom of the sea. The graveyard giants' beams were so dense that it was not easy to avoid them, but the two of them changed direction by appropriately spraying magical power and aura while descending. Like people who have been together for a long time, there was no need to say more. Jean and Valeria worked as one body and took care of each other's safety. Jean knows most of her fighting methods thanks to her memories from her past life, but Valeria does not. Nevertheless, when Jean fought alongside Valeria, he felt just as amazing as her. Unlike me, my teacher doesn't know me very well in this life, but we get along well every time. Fighting with Jean is always strangely stable. The two people heading towards the center of the enemies had not suffered much damage yet, but the upper part was already in chaos. The Bamul Alliance did not take any damage thanks to Quickantle's good evasion, but the problem with the Zippel Kinslow Garden of Swords pursuit party was that there were too many of them. Fish that are too small to slip through the net and fish that don't. The state of the Bamul coalition and the rest of the forces was exactly like that. Only Quickantle was leisurely dodging the beam of light, protected by those riding on his back. The powerful men of each force tried their best to minimize damage to their allies, but the power of the graveyard giant went far beyond common sense. If each of the graveyard giants had transcendent status, Jindo would not have even thought about fighting them. No matter how strong you are, a weapon without ego has its limits. Whoa! Along with the red rays, giant tree-like spears flew in from all directions, at a speed so fast that you can't even imagine its size and weight. Instead of intentionally dodging the spear that hit me first, I struck it down with my sword as a test, and my wrist became stiff. Attacks that are heavy but have no anomalies or depth. Repetition of monotonous patterns like a machine reacting to certain situations. However, due to the large number of them, the route naturally became complicated, but Jean was able to land on the seafloor without difficulty, knocking away their spears. As soon as the two people touched the ground, the defensive equipment on the buildings activated in unison and aimed at Jean. Is this an automatic response magic cannon like the one made by Lord Amela? The magic cannon did not identify enemies. Even though the graveyard giants were blocking it, they just fired their guns in the direction where Jean was. However, the gun bounced in all directions like light reflected in a mirror. The gun bounced off the bodies of the graveyard giants, creating a noise unbecoming of its power. The majority escaped through the air or the seawall, but they were still so numerous that there were many guns that threatened Jean and Valeria's path. This must be a little tiring. The moment that thought occurred to me, Valeria tapped the floor once with her silver pine staff. Then a huge magic circle was formed like water flowing through a groove. It's not a shield. I will twist the flow of reflected artillery, so you just focus on destroying the graveyard giant. The magic power extending from the magic circle began to engrave runes in the air. About 1,000 runes were fixed at a distance of about 5 steps from each other, and the guns seemed to be stuck, unable to easily pass between them. Even the guns that were hung like that never reached the two people. The guns seemed completely unaware of the fixed radius in which the two people were moving. The size of magical power is much smaller than the destructive power of artillery. Is this possible? It's like a master attacking an underdog with less force. Valeria was using magic to handle situations that can usually be found in fights between warriors. I probably survived Runch's sister through this miraculous power. Jean was once again shocked by his teacher's magic. I get it. Puzzle dash. Sigmund was filled with deep brain energy. Jean then used all his strength to cut off the ankles of the graveyard giant who was blocking his path. The blade did not go in smoothly. That means it wasn't cut. Instead, one part of his ankle was broken and dug open with a dull noise, but Jean thought that was enough. It's not like you can't cut it if you put your mind to it. To do this, you must be highly focused every time you unleash your sword. There was no need to fight so ineffectively. Grasp. When the blade was stuck and the brain energy exploded, the graveyard giant's ankle was shattered. It was a bit messy to think it was cut by a warrior of Jin's caliber, but the effect was clear. Gook! The graveyard giant with a torn ankle kneels down on one knee and tries to regain his balance. Jin leapt over the guy's body and stabbed him with his sword. Before his head was shattered and the fragments mixed with brain energy fell to the floor, Jin descended like lightning and struck down the spears that flew at Valeria. It seemed as if the thunder god was trampling on the spear and crushing it. Jin was so small that he seemed like an insignificant creature compared to the graveyard giants, but his presence was incomparable even if all the giants were added together. If it were my father, he would have naturally dismantled these guys without even having to concentrate. The thought of my father suddenly occurred to me and my eyebrows narrowed for a moment. It looks like you have time to think about other things. Here you have to risk your life every moment. Let me focus more. In fact, just as Valeria twisted the trajectory of the magic cannon, Jean was also able to make sure that she never got hurt. As long as it's limited to graveyard giants, it's okay. Valeria said this for no reason, even though she was not aware of that fact. Jean was a little surprised that she was now talking nonsense to him. A pleasant battle. Regardless of the situation, the two people felt refreshed as they harmonized perfectly at every moment. When Jean swung his sword, something in the graveyard giant broke, and when Valeria used magic, their attacks were misaligned. No matter how many graveyard giants there were, it seemed like it would be fun to destroy them. More than 10 graveyard giants have already been destroyed. Meanwhile, there was a newly formed graveyard giant, but fortunately it was not faster than the two people could handle it. Additionally, the rate at which new graveyard giants were appearing was slowing down. Jean predicted that once a certain number was reached, no more would be created. Jean. Why? By nature, these weapons do not operate when the target of protection disappears. Are you saying there could be the remains of a forgotten god somewhere in this tomb? Maybe so, or maybe God himself remains. Could it be that the person believed to be the living old Runkendal is a god? I don't have a bird to use the recording magic on right now, so I can't confirm until I see you in person. Even if I look at the records, there aren't many areas that I can know at my current level. And even though their movements are simple, it seems too simple. At Valeria's words, Jean suddenly got the feeling that the movements of the cemetery giants were strange. As if it had some purpose. From what you say, it doesn't seem like the graveyard giants are only moving to get rid of intruders. Each one was so huge that I didn't recognize it until just now because I was worried about causing damage to my allies and was destroying them as much as possible. The formation they are deploying is not one in which they intend to surround us, Valeria. It just seemed like we were naturally put under pressure because of our size. Jean and Valeria passed between the graveyard giant's legs and began to take a closer look at their overall movements. First of all, not all of the graveyard giants were attacking Jean and Valeria. One graveyard giant stood still and stared at the ground while another giant was digging the ground. Unless it's broken, there's only one reason to dig it. You're trying to find something. The graveyard giants exploring the underground have a more elaborate form than other giants. Jean, if my prediction is correct, this is an ancient method of breaking seals. I'm trying to find the core of the seal buried somewhere here. What happens after we find the core? The power of all the graveyard giants will be connected to the core and the seal will be released. The reason the sword flew for such a long time in the first place must have been in the process of finding where the core was hidden. So that means the sealed entity won't be able to wake up the moment we destroy them all. Valeria nodded. The choice is yours. The one who awakens from the seal is the old Runkendal, who is presumed to be a god or a divine being. There is no guarantee that whoever he is, he will show favor to both of you. Rather, it was much more likely that they would turn out to be hostile. Or beyond just being hostile, there was a possibility that they were filled with resentment and hatred like Paidler. Let's wake him up. But Jean didn't even worry. If you destroy all the graveyard giants right away, you and your party will be safe, but a piece of old Runkendel's history will be lost forever. From then on, the two changed their stance to focus solely on defense. The graveyard giants continued to attack, but when the two did not fight back, they gradually reduced their intensity. As about 10 minutes passed, the graveyard giants appeared to no longer attack the two. However, the attacks against the sky did not stop. The graveyard giants are not attacking the Lord and Arya. It must be the result of the Master finding some clue. I think we just have to keep dodging and blocking well. Thanks to this, the sky became even more chaotic, but it did not have much effect on my colleagues. In the first place, the Bamul Alliance did not counterattack even once after the graveyard giants awakened. On the other hand, Zippel and Kinzelo's Garden of Swords continued to fight back, so the graveyard giants did not even recognize the Quicantel group as enemies at any point. Nevertheless, the reason I had a hard time avoiding the red rays was only because my colleagues overlapped the path where I had to attack the recognized enemies. I almost did a great disservice to my ancestors who were awakening after 1,000 years. As about 10 minutes passed, a graveyard giant appeared, shaking with flashing eyes. Coincidentally, it was the graveyard giant right in front of Jean and Valeria. Gook! As the graveyard giant let out a roar, the other giants also trembled with their eyes shining, which seemed to be a process of injecting power into the core of the seal. The first to roar, the graveyard giant finally raised both hands that had been stirring under the seafloor. In that hand was a sphere that shined like a small sun, and Jean and Valeria were able to watch as the power of the graveyard giants was all concentrated there. Please pray that we wake up when we can handle it.